Welcome to More Creative. I'm your host, Ashley Wiley, and today we talk with Brent Boss, a senior research physicist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. During our conversation, Brent talks about his early inspiration to study space exploration and his eventual recruitment by NASA. We talk about his involvement in the Mars Lander mission, his journey to try to get into space someday, and so much more about his experience working in the field of space exploration, including working on a project for Elon Musk. It was really incredible to speak with Brent about his story. I have chills just hearing some of this stuff, but I hope y'all enjoy it. Brent, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to be here.
So I always like to get started learning a little bit about your background. So did you always know that you wanted to pursue a career in space exploration?
Yeah, from a pretty young age, the bug sort of bit me. When I was in second grade, we were on an enrichment trip to a planetarium. The whole experience just really kind of captured my imagination. But they had a small kind of astronomy and space science area. They had one of these really old, like the solar system laid out with like the day glow planets all lit up, and they would all spin at the appropriate rate and everything. I thought that was pretty cool, watching Mercury just zoom around the sun. They also had a pretty good section. It was dedicated to the memory of one of the Apollo 1 fallen astronauts, Roger Chaffee. So they had some of his light suits in there and some other memorabilia. It just really caught my imagination, and it never left me from that point on. And as I grew older and kind of figured out what different types of work and research you could do in that area, I just continued on, and with always having that in mind, that that's something I'd like to get into in terms of a career.
Wow. So why did you decide on physics specifically?
So at that point, obviously, I was very interested in science as a kid, kind of almost all aspects of science. I think, like most young kids, I was into dinosaurs for a while and some other things. But as I started to take more formal classes in middle school and then in high school, kind of through the sciences, I realized it was really physics. So that's what I ended up studying after I left high school and went to the University of Michigan.
After you completed your undergrad, you went on to graduate school and to complete a PhD. So what did you decide to pursue your PhD in?
The one thing I realized once I got to Michigan, spent a year or two there, their main interest was in high energy physics. So that was, and I think that still is kind of Michigan's forte. It's one of the things they're known for. So at one point I was involved for I guess about 8 months. It's what I did my honors thesis on at Michigan, was on high energy astrophysics, and then ended up taking an optics class, and the professor that taught that was somebody I already kind of knew. He was an astrophysicist, but he taught this optics course, and it was just, I really loved it. It was very interesting. He related it a little bit to astronomy. Again, it was very mathematically based, but it was math that was accessible, and you could actually do a lot of things kind of fairly simply on just pen and paper, a couple pages. And so I really got interested in optics at that point and worked with him for a while on a new type of pressure transducer he was trying to come up with and patent. So, but that's where I really got interested in optics, and was talking to him, and we were talking about the different problems we were encountering, and he was like, "Oh, I don't know if we can solve that problem. That we might need someone with a PhD in optics to solve." And I said, "Really? You can get a PhD in optics?" He's like, "Yeah, there's certain subfields in physics that now um, there's enough work and it's broad enough that you can even kind of specialize in that sub area." And so that's where I kind of got the bug to follow optics. And he had told me kind of the best places to go, and Arizona was one of, if not the best, was one of the two best in the country to go to.
Wow. So, one thing that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting, while you were there, you ended up living in the Arctic for 3 weeks. So, can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so the group I ended up joining was one who was heavily involved in Mars exploration at that point, building Mars cameras. So I joined this group led who ended up being my PhD advisor, Peter Smith, and they had just launched the Mars Pathfinder camera in 1996, and I joined his group in January of 97. And at that point, his group was kind of the place to be for planetary at least Mars camera systems. And an opportunity came up a couple years after I joined his group to go and pretend like we were on Mars up in the Arctic. There's a yearly experiment that NASA helps fund and is run out of the SETI Institute in California. And there's a large impact crater up there called Houghton Crater. So you have this big impact crater, you have a desert-like area, and so it's very Mars-like. So we took 3 of our cameras that were for different missions at that point and did some things simulating like we had a unmanned robotic mission. And then also at the same time, there was the Mars Society, which is a private Mars exploration advocacy group, was funding this manned Mars simulation, and they had a habitat that they built up there that could hold 6 people. And so we did both of those things. Both my advisor and I spent turns doing kind of testing out our cameras in a robotic sense, but then also pretending like we were living on Mars and exploring the terrain under Mars constraints. So we had to stay inside the habitat all the time unless we went outside in simulated spacesuits. Couldn't talk to Earth without a delay. It was a lot of fun. That was a good experience, and we were working with people from kind of all around the world that were other Mars exploration folks. So it was a really neat environment.
Wow, that is incredible. So while you were there, were you able to sort of place yourself on Mars and actually feel like you weren't on Earth anymore?
Yeah, most of the time it felt like we were somewhere remote and slightly dangerous. The reality would sort of come back in when any of the camera crews would show up. So they were shooting a documentary of everything that was going on up at Houghton Crater that year. So when they would come, then it sort of broke. It kind of helped you feel less isolated.
Right.
But it was part of the reason the Mars Society could even do it, because they had received some funding from the Discovery Channel in order to do that. So we kind of had to put up with it. And probably the strangest thing, just to put you out of your normal comfort zone, was we were above the Arctic Circle, so the sun never set while we were up there in the summertime. So it was very difficult to kind of rely on your internal clock
Mhm.
about when it was time to get up, or mainly when it was time to go to bed. Because getting up, all the staterooms, well, they were called staterooms, the little closets we were all slept in, which was our personal space in the habitat, those didn't have any windows, and so you could keep it really dark. So it was kind of easy to go to sleep in there. But kind of the main work areas all had quite a bit of natural light coming in, so you never got the feeling like, okay, it's kind of time to stop working. And everybody, I think, recognizes that when you're up there, it's very easy to just keep working, and before you know it, it's 3 in the morning, but it looks like it's like 3 in the afternoon because the sun's not that low in the sky. So that was probably the biggest thing to get used to, was the sun always being up, and you just have to force yourself to try to get sleep. One thing I learned was it's a good analog. That area is a really good analog for certain things, particularly for biology. So I met a lot of biologists up there that were looking at extremophiles, how organisms adapt to extreme environments. And it seems like one of the few places in the world to really get a good idea. A lot of work. It was a lot of fun, and I'm glad I did it. Even though it didn't always feel like we were on Mars, it definitely felt otherworldly, just because of the Arctic, and that the impact crater up there is just incredible. I mean, it's huge. You can't see it all. Some of it's eroded away, so it's not like there's a really nice meteor crater in Arizona.
That is amazing. What a once in a lifetime experience to be able to be a part of that. So, while you were completing your PhD, did you have any thought of where you might want to work after you were finished?
Yeah, well, at the time I was actually still working. I was doing some part-time work as well on the side in kind of optics and optical physics for an automotive supply company, which I had worked for a little bit right after I finished my undergraduate degree. And I was having a lot of fun doing that, and because that's sort of another interest of mine had always been automobiles. And so I was doing that, but I was very interested in seeing once I finished my PhD, what type of work I could do at NASA. I'd always obviously dreamed about working at NASA, just wasn't really sure how I could make that happen. We had a lot of contacts at JPL, which the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, because they're the ones that do most of the Mars work. Um, but that was the California Institute of Technology that really runs that. It's not really NASA, but I was kind of interested in working there. Um, there were other big aerospace companies I was interested in working for because we had worked with Lockheed Martin on a lot of the things that we were doing at Arizona for the Mars mission. So I was looking around. I wasn't even really sure how to apply to NASA at that point. I really wanted to see who was interested in what I was doing. So it kind of ties into the story of going to the Arctic. So uh, in the spring of that year, while I was getting ready to go to the Arctic, like I said, it took a lot of work to prepare for that. So I was in the middle of figuring out, okay, what do we need for 3 weeks in the Arctic to make it meaningful for us? And so I was trying to pull all this stuff together, get new parts, and figure out how to get all the equipment up there. And these two recruiters show up at the university, in fact, in our department. And I thought, oh, that'd be fun. I just don't have time to get over there and talk to these people. And I think it was a Friday, and like Thursday or Friday, and I get a call from our branch secretary, and they're like, "Oh, these NASA people are here, and they saw your resume and what you're working on. They really want to talk to you, and they saw that you didn't sign up for a slot, for an interview slot." And I said, "Well, I'm really busy. I'm really busy right now. I'm trying to, explain it to her." And she's like, "Well, they said they're open all afternoon, but they got to fly out like the next day or something. So stop by whenever you can." So luckily, where I was actually working was only across the street from it. But you know how that goes. How when you're busy with something, you're just sort of focused and want to finish it up. But I took a break and went over there and ended up meeting two folks who I ended up working with later. But they told me what they needed at Goddard. So this was the Goddard Space Flight Center, and thought I would be a good match for that, and if I'd be interested. And I said I would be, and that yeah, we should continue to talk. So then the next thing I remember, at least anyway, is I'm up in the Arctic. I think we're like a week in or something, and we could get email periodically up there because one of the guys who was doing research was figuring out how to do communications in extreme environments. So he had actually a satellite link that we could use sometimes. So I get an email during one of the times where we're able to get internet, and it says, "Oh, these are so and so from Goddard. We posted the job we had you in mind for, but it closes like next week."
Oh.
And I'm like, "Well, I'm up in the Arctic. I don't think I can do anything." And so I they said, "Well, I think we can get it extended by like 2 weeks or something like that." But they said there's some kind of like federal law on how many times they can change the deadline or something. So I said, "Well, as long as you can extend it to when I get back into the United States, then I should have time to fill it out." So that's what ended up happening. I think they were able to extend it by another week or two, and I put in an application, and then I think around October of that year, then I flew out to Goddard and checked it out, and it seemed like a really interesting place to be. It was a little closer to home than what kind of the West Coast would be, and I had just gotten married the year before, and we had a baby on the way, and so NASA ended up for a number of reasons, ended up being the best offer that was out there.
What was it like when you officially got your offer from NASA?
Well, I was surprised, because there's sort of, for the type of work I do, there's kind of three tracks you can take. You can either go, try to get tenure at a university somewhere and teach, which is what some people want to do. You can try to go to work for one of the big aerospace companies, which is also a good opportunity, but you might not always have much freedom to decide what you're going to work on. And then there's NASA, or the kind of the places related to NASA, like JPL and things like that. And that, so I had kind of the breadth of all of those types of opportunities. And sure enough, NASA was kind of middle of the road in terms of pay and other things, but in terms of the ability to decide what you were going to work on, and obviously the opportunity to support most of whatever NASA was doing, was going to be best to go to NASA. And so that's what I ended up doing. Turns out, I think, to in retrospect, 18 years later, it was a good decision.
Wow. I'm always so fascinated by people's mindsets when they start a position at a place they've always dreamed of working. So, when you started your very first day, what were you thinking? I mean, did you have imposter syndrome? Were you excited? What was that like, actually getting to work on NASA projects?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a good Yeah, that's a good term, imposter syndrome. I did have that a little bit, even though I had already worked on a number of flight missions and delivered flight hardware, especially as a kid growing up, just admiring everything that NASA does and everybody who worked there. Like, oh man, I don't. Let's hope they don't find out. I don't know what the world I'm doing. And early on, I had a pretty big responsibility as well. So when I had been recruited to come to Goddard, the two people had told me they were really needed people to help work on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is the follow-on to the Hubble Space Telescope. Obviously, a lot of optics in there. The funny thing was, I had gone to a talk a couple of years earlier where some other Goddard people had come out just for a general um, department talk, and they had made it sound like James Webb basically was already done. It wasn't called James Webb at that point; it was still called the Next Generation Space Telescope. But I remember going to the talk and thinking, "Oh, that would have been a great like optics space challenge to be involved in," and these guys made it sound like it was already basically done. So when they had told me that that's what they really wanted to come they wanted me to come to Goddard to work on. I was like, really? That's not done yet? And sure enough, it had hardly even gotten started, and still, all these years later, it still hasn't launched. But that's initially what I worked on, which was the biggest unmanned project at that point at NASA. Probably the biggest thing we'll ever do from an unmanned standpoint for quite a while. So yeah, there was a little bit of that imposter idea coming in, like, okay, these people are a lot smarter than I am. They know a lot more than me. I'm just gonna try to be a fly on the wall and help out where I can. And then, fairly quickly you realize, no, Arizona did an amazing job of preparing me to do that kind of work. And yeah, even working with international people, you realize, wow, there's a small number of people really in the world who kind of have the expertise to do the work that we're doing. And so, yeah, initially too, I was very excited to go there. Just when I got my badge, and you take the oath of office to be a civil servant,
Oh,
and I hadn't really thought of it kind of when I accepted the offer, but it was also a real opportunity to kind of, to serve the country and give back a little bit. So yeah, it was a mixture of enthusiasm and excitement, and yeah, a little bit of that. Boy, I wonder if I can really do what they want me to do, especially being kind of fresh out. So there's a lot of work early on, a lot, and it changed a lot as well during those first couple of years. It's a very big project, lots of moving parts. Very different than my experience at Arizona, where we're building cameras, and the number of people involved. At the time I thought it was a pretty big group. It was like, and it was never bigger than like 30 people. And usually I was only interacting with maybe a half a dozen people. And if we wanted to make a change or we needed to do something, you could go right talk to that person, and grab somebody else in the hallway and go, I think we should do this. Let's do it. Okay, we'll do it. Whereas on James Webb, it was even if it was the right thing to do, and it was even blatantly obvious it was the right thing to do, you had to sell it to all the partners. So it was a big job making a change on Webb compared to what my experience had been working on Mars missions. It was a whole nother level of effort. And I eventually got to feel really comfortable and figured out kind of the unwritten rules of both NASA, Goddard, and then even the project itself. Every project has their own sort of unwritten rules and culture. So once that was figured out, it went pretty well, and had a really good time working on that project for a while, until kind of the last big parts of what NASA itself was actually building were done. Um, I worked on on it for, I guess, 9, 10, 11 years, something like that.
Wow.
I continued to work on it even after I moved on to more full time on other things. Just try to explain to the new people that were coming on board why we did things the way we did and why things looked the way they looked. But it's amazing to me it still hasn't launched. That's the real downside of it. So I was really thankful for that opportunity, and it really taught me a lot. But I'm also thankful for the other interesting missions that came along, both during it and then to kind of transition to once what I thought, at least the interesting parts of it, were kind of winding down from an optics perspective. So, and sure enough, that expectation I had to come to NASA that I could always find something that really piqued my interest has held out to be true. So I've been fortunate.
You also ended up helping take part in the Phoenix Mars lander mission. What was it like working on a project knowing that you helped take images that would help assess the habitability of Mars?
Yeah, well, that was really exciting because that was so one of the cameras on that mission was a big part of my PhD dissertation. And when I had finished my PhD, it wasn't exactly clear what camera it was going to fly on because I don't know if you remember, but in the late 90s, we had two big Mars failures. And it actually delayed my PhD completion because I had some experiments planned for those things. So I kind of had to revamp even what I was doing and delayed me graduating by about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. But fortunately, there was still this other camera. We didn't know exactly where it was going to go or what it was going to fly on. But eventually, my old boss, Peter Smith, put together this proposal to go to the Mars Northern Arctic, which was great because we had already been to Earth's Arctic, and we wanted to go to the Mars Arctic, and ended up this camera that I knew very well and had spent a lot of time with was going to be one of the primary cameras on the mission. So that was exciting in and of itself because I had spent so much time with that camera, held it in my hands, loved it, adored it, all those things, understood everything about how it worked. And finally, the chance to operate it on Mars was just incredible. And again, I'd always hoped I'd get that chance, but at that point I was heavily involved in James Webb. I actually had to take a small leave of absence because this was full-time work for several months once we had landed. So I had to some of the James Webb work had to get delayed for a little bit, but this was a big opportunity for me. There was nothing they could do that was going to keep me from working on the Phoenix mission. So it was great to finally see the first images that we took with the camera. Where when we had pretended to do the same, this was one of the at least the engineering model of this camera was one of the cameras we had taken up to the Arctic. So it spent time up there freezing, freezing our tushes off, taking images, acting like we were on Mars, and here we were actually taking images on Mars finally for real. We didn't have to play like we were on Mars anymore. So that was great. And yeah, finding the water was the main part of the mission. It had been suspected that there was a huge reservoir of frozen water beneath the surface. That was another University of Arizona person whose experiment had detected that from orbit. Bill Boynton was his name, and so that's the whole point of the Phoenix mission was to fly down to that area and actually confirm that, yeah, in fact, there's a big reservoir of frozen water. And we were worried early on with the mission, certainly in its planning stages, that the water would be buried too far below the surface, that we wouldn't be able to dig far enough with the robotic arm that we brought along. And so Peter, my old boss, actually made the decision to spend a fair amount of money and completely revamp that arm, make it a little longer, improve the motors, and do some other things to make sure, at least give ourselves the best chance we could that we'd be able to actually dig down into the surface. And then once we got there, it actually turns out we didn't have to dig that far. And I don't know if you remember early on, if you've seen any of the kind of the old archives of that mission, it looked like we had actually excavated a bunch of material away down to the solid ice layer using just the retrojets on the rocket itself. So initially, when we landed, we saw this white area. We were like, boy, that really already looks like water ice. Of course, we didn't have the tools necessary to really prove that until we started digging and showed that, yeah, the water wasn't that far down, and it didn't take us long to actually confirm it at least using the camera systems. But we had, in order for NASA headquarters to consider it successful, we actually had to get some of that water ice into one of the in situ experiments on board called TIGA, which would cook the water ice and look at the vapor driven off to confirm, in fact, yeah, it's water. But
Whoa.
it was a little anticlimactic by the time we got there because we had already had several observations and other ways to know that that was water. But yeah, it was great. So it'd be very rewarding if some of that work helps humanity to eventually work and maybe even live on Mars.
Oh my God, that's so cool. I mean, just to be able to see the images of something that you worked on that took those successfully, I mean, I can't even imagine what that feeling was like.
That was it was a little bit like a dream come true as a kid when I used to, look through my crappy telescope at the moon and Saturn and whatever I could see through it. You kind of envision yourself there and envision interacting with that area. And I'd still love to do that in person, but doing it robotically like that is the next best thing. And yeah, I still remember one time I was on shift. So normally the roles on the science operations team, you sort of cycle through roles. At least that's the kind of a healthy way to do it because some parts are more stressful than others. And usually you want to have some opportunity to analyze the data for yourself that's coming back. But on one of the times when I was the one responsible for actually assembling the commands that were going to be run on the camera for a particular day, um, and of course, you probably know Mars has a longer day than Earth has. So eventually you get out of sync where, daytime on Mars is nighttime on Earth and so on. But that changes constantly throughout the course of the mission. But one of these times when I was on shift, I think I got done like around 3 or 4 in the morning, Tucson time, which is where we were doing all the science operations from. And it was going to be something fairly exciting too. I think we had a dig planned and we were going to take some fresh images in color, which we didn't always take. Sometimes we just relied on monochrome or black and white type imaging. But so it was going to be a really nice image set. And walked out of the Tucson Operations Center then like 3 or 4 in the morning and looked up in the sky and there's Mars in the nighttime sky in Tucson. And I'm just looking at it thinking, wow, something I just did is going to make something happen there in a couple hours. I mean, that's just amazing. I always hoped I could do something like that, but um, didn't really expect or even know how that would be possible. But sure enough, got to do it. So particularly that mission, given all the experience I had with one of the cameras on board, it was really nice.
So I'm guessing that you want to go into space someday.
Yeah, I would love to go into space myself. I've tried a couple. Well, I've applied to the NASA astronaut program. I don't know how many cycles we've been through now. Probably at least six
Oh,
since
wow.
I've gotten my PhD. I've gotten close twice, which is really another whole interesting experience. Went down for interviews and testing and all that down at Johnson Space Center. And when they're down there, they take you in small groups and they really make you feel like you're kind of already there. So it's all that week you're there is just amazing because you're just hanging out with people who love space exploration and people who've been there and can tell you what it's like. And you're trying to see if you're somebody they'd like to be stuck in a very small area with for a long period of time. And maybe they decided I wasn't, but yeah, it's great. It's great fun. And everybody I've known that's gone through that process too says the same thing. They just feel honored for the chance to be considered, and it's just really fun to like take you into mission control and you can hang out if you want to and watch what they're doing. Like one of the days I was there and we didn't, I think the testing was done, interviews weren't going on at that point, and a couple of us, like one of the astronaut, really a senior guy who wasn't flying anymore but was still considered an astronaut, part of the astronaut office, was like, oh, you guys want to just go hang out? They're doing this big spacewalk. I think they're doing a radiator repair, trying to fix a leak somewhere. And they're like, it'd be pretty cool. So, I don't know, we spent like half hour watching what they were doing. And yeah, it's really neat. It was a really fun experience. So there's another cycle going on right now. I don't know if I'm getting a little old. So there isn't an official cutoff age because of federal law. law, but there's kind of, there's sort of an unspoken one. But yeah, I'd love the opportunity to go if it doesn't happen through kind of that traditional NASA approach. I think there will be private opportunities to go into space. There may be even uh, NASA will probably fund people to take experiments themselves with some of these commercial providers here in the near future. So if there's a reason that I need to take one of my things I'm working on, either from to experience zero gravity or some type of particular observation above most of the atmosphere, I would love to attend my own experiment up in space. That'd be really cool.
Wow, that's something that I hope you do get to do. That would be such an incredible opportunity.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, we'll see. Yeah, it's a really amazing time, right? It's kind of a renaissance, in my opinion, in terms of all the advances being made in the private sector with human exploration. That's where, and in my mind, that's really where, at least for human exploration of space, if we're going to do anything new, it's going to rely on people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and SpaceX and Blue Origin and probably other companies we haven't quite heard about yet. Because once it becomes economically feasible, then I think it's just going to blossom even more. So from that standpoint, it's an exciting time to be kind of in the field. I mean, I always look back, particularly, I mean, Apollo was over and done before I even knew what was going on. I was alive for part of it, but just a baby or a kid, didn't really know what was going on. So I always kind of, particularly as I've watched the human program over the years, I felt like I've kind of missed out on that golden age of human space exploration. And in some sense, we did, but now there's this new age that is coming about because of all the private investment, and it's really exciting, and I think it's more sustainable because of the economy, because of the economics of the situation. So that's the thing. So I've been, like I said, I've been a space exploration nut for most of my life and kind of watching what's been happening. And it's always been, NASA's always had the goal of sending humans to Mars. It's always like 10 years out, 15 years out. And it's constantly that type of schedule that they're talking about. It never gets closer. And so our whole community that thinks it's important for humanity to explore space has been waiting for people that on to spend, that had the money and were interested in wasting that fortune on space exploration. And luckily, we finally got it. We finally got Elon Musk, who's my age, and Jeff Bezos, who's a little bit older. And, they accrued money in sort of mundane ways. At least I wouldn't be interested in trying to accrue vast fortunes the way they did, but they did. But their first love, apparently, is space exploration. And they're willing to sink vast parts of their wealth into that endeavor. And Jeff Bezos has said publicly that to keep Blue Origin going, which is his space company, he sells $1 billion of Amazon stock every year just to keep that company going, because they've gotten very little money from NASA. They've only had a few, I think, contracts. So most of that's all been self-funded because Jeff Bezos believes in it. So the community finally has those people we've always dreamed about, and they're not just talking about doing it, they're actually doing it. And so I think it's a really exciting time. And yeah, I think NASA will have involvement in things like that, but I really think NASA's role in that type of work will probably get eclipsed eventually, because the private sector can just do it so much quicker and easier, because of the way politics work now. The country just doesn't seem to be able to do almost anything. Even if it's a good idea, if it was, one side's idea, the other side will say it's a bad idea just because it came from the other side. So I was always a believer for most of my life that, we just needed to get people interested and excited about space like they were in the Apollo time, but I just don't see that happening again. So I really think the private sector will really come to the rescue there in terms of the human exploration of space.
So you actually had the opportunity of working on Elon Musk's Mars mission. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so this was before anybody knew who Elon Musk was. As we were getting ready to go to the Arctic when I was in graduate school, so the Mars Society, like I said, was running part of the experiment up there that year, and they were trying to raise money for the work they were doing because it's all self-funded. So they put on a fundraiser in the San Jose area, San Francisco area, and Peter and I, so my advisor and I, were out there to kind of coordinate. I was talking about all that equipment I had to figure out how to get up there, and we had to go out there and work with them to coordinate what we were planning on doing. And that weekend they were planning on doing this big fundraiser, which I wasn't planning on being involved with because I think it was like $500 a plate or something like that. I mean, and I was a graduate student.
Yeah.
There's no way I was paying $500 to go to this fundraiser thing. And but we were going to be out there anyway, and my advisor Peter, he's like, oh, they just told me that they didn't fill up the number of seats, and they're willing to have us come if we're just willing to pay the cost, at cost. And I'm like, well, what's what is it? He's like $100. I still thought that was too high. I was like, oh man, $100. And but Peter's like, well, I'm gonna go. I think that's reasonable. I'm gonna go. And he had the rental car, and so I was either stuck in a hotel room on a Saturday night or go to this thing for $100.
Mhm.
So I was like, okay, I'll go with you, Peter. We'll go. So it was at this guy's house who was a big part of the Mars Society. He was actually a NASA employee as well. Bill Clancy was his name, and he had a really nice house up in the foothills there. Um, and so this was a pretty small affair. There's probably, I don't know, like maybe 50 people there. But anyway, we go, and the main attraction, the reason people were going to be willing to pay big bucks is that they had been able to get the movie director Jim Cameron to come and give a talk on this Mars series he was going to be developing. And so I was really interested in talking to him. There were a few other people too that were doing private space exploration stuff I was kind of interested in meeting because I hadn't met them. But my main focus was going to be on talking to Jim Cameron because the other thing was he was supposed to be like the next space tourist at that point. Like Dennis Tito, I think, was scheduled to come back. He had paid the Russians to go up into space on one of their spacecraft, and in the news and in the community, we're hearing that, oh, Jim Cameron's going to go up there. Same thing, but he's going to film a movie. So I really wanted to talk to him and find out if that in fact was the case. And of course, he had also directed one of the Terminator movies and Aliens, which is one of my favorite movies. So I really wanted to talk to him. But anyway, we find out we're meeting with these Mars Society people talking about the Arctic, and one of the guys says, he says, yeah, there's some .com entrepreneur that's going to be at this get together, and like apparently he's got some deep pockets because he called up the organizer of the fundraiser and said, well, how much do I have to pay um, for the fundraiser to be guaranteed a seat to sit right next to Jim Cameron during dinner? And they're like, oh, I don't know. They made up some number and some crazy number, and whatever it was, he paid it. And it turns out it was Elon Musk. So we're at this, kind of small party, and Elon shows up with his wife, and we sort of met them, and yeah, we had no idea really who he was at that point. But he started to talk about how he was interested in, really interested in space exploration, and he apparently had made a bunch of money selling some online thing he had done, and he was really interested and really excited about it. And so all the Mars Society people were very interested in that, trying to think about, oh boy, here's somebody who can really fund some of the stuff that we want to do. But so we met him at the party, and sort of in passing. Again, my main focus was on talking to Jim Cameron, finding about if he really was going to go into space himself and all that. So I didn't think much of it. And then a couple of months later, I guess it was after we were back from the Arctic, we got a call from Paragon Aerospace, which is in Tucson, and they're a company actually made up of ex-biospherans. I don't know if you remember the biosphere, but there were these people who locked themselves in this supposedly completely self-contained.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, that had taken place north of Tucson, and a couple of those, I think two of them, have founded this company. After that, to do kind of life sciences experiments in space. So they had flown some stuff like on the shuttle and done a few other things at that point. Anyway, they called us up, and again, like I said earlier, this group that I was working with at Arizona with Peter Smith, it was the place to be for Mars camera imaging, planetary imaging just in general. And so they called us up and said, "Hey, we've got this private Mars mission that we've been contacted about, and we're going to build this experiment, and but we need some cameras as part of this experiment. Would you guys be willing to be involved in that?" And so Peter's like, yeah, sure. If you got some money, well, we can help out. So we went down there. Paragon was located in Tucson as well, and drove there and found more details about it. And sure enough, it was this guy, Elon Musk, that we had met, several months earlier. He was putting his money where his mouth was, and he wanted to fly an experiment to Mars where you took along a variety of different plants, and you would fly to Mars, you'd land this lander on Mars, you would dig up some Martian regolith or dirt. Regolith is kind of a fancy word we use for dirt in the planetary sciences community. But we'd dig up some of the Mars regolith, put it inside this chamber that would introduce water and air and other things that plants need to grow, and you would prove that you could grow crops on Mars. And they called it life on Mars or something like that at that point. And our cameras, they just wanted cameras to help confirm that some material had been dug up, and then also to document that the plants were growing. So, and it was all supposed to fly to Mars on these ICBMs that Russia had to get rid of because of some of the nuclear treaties that were in place at the time. They had to dismantle, like take the warheads off, but they still had these perfectly good missiles that could launch small payloads into space. So that was Elon's idea at that point. He thought he had his own. He thought he had enough of his own money, and he could get enough of his rich friends to contribute to this private mission, and they were going to fly it. It was some kind of crazy number, like 30 million, I think, something like that. I don't know. It was on that order. I mean, it was crazy type numbers, because a normal, like the Perseverance mission we just launched to Mars was probably like $1 billion mission.
Oh my goodness. So it was very, very low in funds.
Right. So yeah, we talked about building a camera really, really cheap as well, but we had a lot of experience, so we felt like we could probably pull it off. So we worked on that mainly with Paragon. I don't think I ever saw Elon himself in a meeting, but we worked on that for probably 4 or 5 months. And at that point, I was feverishly just trying to finish my PhD dissertation and defend it, because I had accepted the NASA job, and my wife was pregnant, and NASA was saying, we can only hold this job for you till you have to start on April 15th, or you have to go through that whole process again. So there was a lot going on at that point, and yeah, the Life on Mars mission, then it sort of was teetering off. We weren't getting much feedback from Paragon on what we were doing. And then finally, I think Peter talked to them. They're like, "Oh yeah, it's kind of off." Elon realized he couldn't do it. Launch costs are just way too expensive. He couldn't do it for what he wanted to do. And we're like, okay. And that happened a lot. We used to get approached by a lot of other people that had deep pockets that wanted to do their own thing. And then they would start to get involved with it and realize, oh, wow, this is a lot more expensive, a lot more difficult than what I anticipated. And we're like, oh, yeah, this guy, Elon, he's just like, half a dozen other people we've seen that wanted to do the same thing. So he's going to go off and, find something else to tickle his fancy with all the money he has just sitting around. And then, yeah, what? Like 2 years later, I think all of a sudden we're hearing in the community, yeah, oh no, Elon is still involved. He's starting his own rocket company to bring, launch costs down. And you're like, really? I mean, that just seems crazy, right? What does this guy know about rockets and stuff? But anyway, yeah. So again, there you have a true believer that just believes in space exploration, and even though things started to get hard or difficult, he didn't let it stop him. Particularly, obviously, he's good at raising money and making money, and he's used that to kind of feed that desire to contribute in his own way to space exploration. So it's been really great to see, particularly kind of knowing kind of where he came from. There's really, yeah, I still remember at that party even, no one really knew who he was, but he came to the party, I think, in one of his early Teslas or some other real exotic car. I didn't see it, but Peter was with the group when they happened to be talking about it. But um, they're sitting around outside, and even James Cameron is talking about how amazing this car is that this, this kid drove.
Hmm.
And I'm like, that must have been some car for probably the biggest Hollywood director at that time to talk about how amazing the car was.
Yeah.
So he definitely had made a splash at the little get together. But yeah, I never expected to ever hear anything more from him, and particularly after that life on Mars thing kind of fell through. I thought, oh yeah, he's had his fill. He realizes how difficult this is and how long it's going to take and how expensive it's going and all that. But that didn't dissuade him. He's like, oh really? That's how much a rocket costs? Well, I think we got to get the cost down so we can actually do what I wanted. So it's been pretty amazing to watch and glad to see how successful they've been.
Wow. I mean, even though it didn't go through, it was still, what an incredible and unique experience to have.
Yeah, it was fun, and he was pulling together people that could really do it. I mean, Paragon had done stuff. We had obviously flown a bunch of stuff at that point to Mars, so he gave it a serious shot. And we had I remember going to one presentation where he showed how they were going to modify the Soviet missile. The other cool thing was going to be launched off a submarine. So they were talking about how they were going to put an additional stage on I mean, it was going to be really cool. It was short lived, but it was neat to at least kind of brainstorm and look at what we could do there for a while. So who knows? He may do a bigger version of that with his own rockets now that he seems like we're probably 5 to 10 years away where he could easily do that himself using his own launch vehicle. So who knows? There might be a lot life on Mars too, where he tries to do something similar.
Wow. I hope so. That would be amazing. So you've gotten to do so many incredible things throughout your career so far, but is there anything in your field that you'd still like to do someday?
I really like to go to kind of the other really interesting planet, at least remotely, um, in the solar system, and that's Venus. So right now at Goddard Space Flight Center, we're working on a pretty ambitious Venus descent project called Da Vinci Plus, which has been proposed over time in slightly different ways over a couple different cycles. And headquarters has given us some money to go and study what that would look like. So we're working on that right now, and we'll find out in kind of the spring, late winter, early spring timeframe whether or not we get enough funding to really make this mission happen. So that would be really great thing to be a part of as well, because NASA's never sent anything to the surface of Venus. The Soviets have done it a little bit. Um, they had some landers that lived for a short time, but this mission would really like a quantum leap in understanding Venus, particularly its atmosphere, some of its surface properties, and the geology on Venus. So I'm really hoping that as some of the other missions I'm working on, like OSIRIS-Rex, which is this really exciting asteroid sample return mission. We're about ready to get our sample here in October and fly it back to Earth. And I'm working on another asteroid mission that should launch in about a year from now. So I'm really hoping when those things ramp down that I'll have this really exciting Venus mission to be a part of, and that will keep us busy for quite.
Wow, I really hope that comes through. It would be fascinating to learn even more about another planet that hasn't been explored as much as Mars seems to be right now. So, I like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast a couple of the same questions. They're a little bit more lighthearted. So, if you could try any profession, and I have to say out of the sciences, other than your current one, without having to worry about school or money or anything like that, what would that be?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be a professional race car driver. I've
Really?
always, like I talked about earlier, automobiles has always been something I've been interested in, and particularly my dad's side of the family are just car tinkerers and are is always restoring something or working on something, and always been interested in cars from a young age. And I haven't been to a lot of races, but they're pretty neat. So yeah, it's very. I'm not sure what it is, but that would be really fun to yeah, dangerous, but I still think really fun. It's very different, from anything else I would do. But if money and time and skill weren't, weren't prerequisites, I've always thought that would be a really neat thing to do.
Wow, that's awesome. Also, do you have any advice on how to turn your passions into a career?
So I think the most important thing is that if you really want to do that, is to have a plan, come up with a way to get from where you are to where you want to be. And you don't have to have every part of that plan filled out. Like myself as a young kid, particularly kind of high school, even undergraduate, I wasn't really sure. I didn't know enough about how to get to where I wanted to be, but I kind of knew what the big chunks were. I knew, okay, people are doing something similar to what I want to do. Okay, they've got a PhD, and okay, it's in astronomy or physics or something like that. Okay, that kind of told you. So you kind of you scope out a broad plan, and then you have to start following that plan, and then things will start to work out. You figure out the big parts, and then sometimes you don't figure out, you don't know exactly how to get from A to B, but you figure it out as you go and you learn more. And so having a plan is really important, and just executing the plan. But of course, life always throws obstacles in your path, either personally or professionally. A lot sometimes it's just out of your control, like the time when we lost the one Mars mission that I was expecting to do most of my PhD on. You just had to adapt and change things. So you have to, if it's something you're really passionate about, you have to stick with it and see it through to the end. And so you got to overcome that first roadblock, that second roadblock, the third one, and if you really want to get there. And sometimes you got to change your plans a little bit, and sometimes what you thought you wanted isn't really what you wanted once you find out kind of more about it. So you also have to have some ability to adapt your goals, so that you make sure that by the time you're done, that you got to where you actually want to be. So having a plan is important, and then just being resilient to whatever life throws at you to try to see it through the end, I think is the way to handle pursuing a passion, any passion really.
Wow, I think that that advice is something that can be very applicable to basically everybody trying to pursue something that they like for their career. So that's really great advice. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today. I mean, it was just incredible to hear about your experience and your career so far. And I don't know, I'm excited to see what you continue to pursue.
Oh, thanks. Well, thanks for having me. It's fun to hopefully try to get people excited about what we do at NASA. I think that's really important, because if you're a federal taxpayer, you're our customer, and hopefully we're doing what you want us to do with your tax dollars. And so I think it's our honor and our privilege whenever we have an opportunity to talk to the public about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why we're excited about it. So I was very happy to do this today.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Brent, links are in the description down below. If you like the show, please leave a rating, subscribe, and comment on whatever platform you listen on. It really helps out the show. For more information, you can find us on Instagram at @BeMoreCreative or on YouTube @MoreCreative. Again, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next time.